Hi, I'm Professor Martin Bunch, and I'm going to give an introduction, an overview of project management for the purpose of supporting students in groups of the C4 Cross-campus Capstone Course at York University to help to organize and implement their projects. What I'm going to show you today is mostly derived from the work from PMI, which is the Project Management Institute. That's a not-for-profit institute that does things like project management, certification, and standards. And they have what's called the Project Management Body of Knowledge, which is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities to meet project requirements. So project management is that in general. And the orientation of project management is to take your project management task, the project that you've been given, and to get the job done on time, within budget, and according to specifications. Now, in this process, there's 5 general stages called process groups in project management. There's project initiation, where you recognize the need, identify constraints, and develop project objectives or goals. There's project planning, where a plan is created to carry out the project. Project execution, which is the actual coordination of resources, things like financial resources and personnel, to execute the plan. Monitoring and controlling, sometimes referred to simply as control, which is monitoring, tracking, and adjusting the activity occurring in the execution to meet the plan objectives. And note that this can be considered a kind of single loop learning, where the focus is on whether you are doing things right. So in quotes, doing things right. And then there's project closing, where you get sign off, you bring things to an orderly conclusion. And that should include a process to identify and communicate the lessons learned, which in this particular schematic that I'm showing you now is split out into cross-project improvement. And that explicitly identifies project management as a learning cycle. And here there may be an opportunity to do kind of double loop learning. So considering the question, are we doing the right thing, rather than just doing things right? Now, one of the common things you'll see with respect to this kind of project management is the identification of this triple constraint, this triangular function here, that identifies scope with time and cost, and the outcome of working within these constraints being the quality of the project that you deliver. The project meaning the output in terms of the service or the product that you're producing. So this kind of idea leads you to ask the questions: what are you tasked with delivering? What time frame do you have to deliver it within? What budget constraints must you deliver with? What level of quality must the deliverables have? It facilitates discussion around things like what resources you have to work with, what's the tolerable range of risk that you can tolerate, and how will you determine the quality of the product or service that you will produce. For example, Max Weideman's Project Management Wisdom site produces a set of things that you need to know in planning for a project. And these include things like what time is the project product or service to be delivered? So that's the project scope. To what standards are those things going to be delivered? That's the quality of the project. How long is it estimated to take, and in what sequence do we need to do all the necessary work? So that's the time involved. Now and only now can we seriously estimate what will be the estimated funding required. So that's the cost. How certain are we that we can do all of this? That's the associated risk and also the opportunities. What's the quality of the human performance required to achieve those results? The quality of the process. What are the skills needed to do the work? That's the human resources required. What resources must be outsourced or contracted for, or what corporate commitments must be obtained procedurally in procured internally, that is. So that's the contract procurement arrangements. And how is all of that to be melded into an effective and efficient whole? So that's information and communications. I wanted to point out something in addition to that. I've been talking a little bit about constraints, but there's a difference between constraints and restraints. So a constraint refers to the restriction or limitation on someone or something. That's a constraint, for example, of the resources available or the personnel available. And that's different from restraints, which is something that's imposed on you from outside. So your boss might take a look at you and say, okay, well, you need to be careful not to overstep the intellectual property requirements or limitations for products that are trying to achieve the same objective. Or perhaps you may be constrained or restrained from contracting with a particular organization. The military folks would say, okay, well, the restraint might be you can't go there because you're going to be interfering with the area of operation of a different unit, and you might compromise their mission or something like that. Now, I wanted to point out this graph because it kind of demonstrates the process through time, and it shows you a couple of key considerations that you should be thinking about. So primarily, it looks at the fact that you have the opportunity for creativity and to add value to your project earlier in the project, and the cost to change things, your plan and how you're going to be going about doing things, increase as you go through the project. So the opportunity to add value declines and the cost to change things increases. And you have that opportunity, and potentially you have the ability to afford changes to the project up into the execution phase. But at a certain point, changing things will become problematic. You can really mess with your project if you decide to take a left turn in the latter stages of the project. You just won't have time, or maybe not the cost or resources, to switch gears at that point of time. So in the planning phase, make sure you do a good job planning to avoid having to switch gears and make changes, large changes, in the later stages of the project. Now, there are a number of kind of things that you need to know about to do project management properly. And in the work that you're going to be doing in this course, you don't really need to know about all of them. For example, you don't really need to know how to do procurement, but you will need to do many of these kinds of things. And thinking through them will probably be helpful in developing your project plan. So I'm going to go through these just quickly, one at a time. So you need to know how to integrate your activities across the different project management areas and process groups. That's through those primary phases of work in project management, through initiation to planning to execution, etc. You need to understand how to scope your project, to understand what you absolutely need to do in order to be able to accomplish your objectives, right? And it also means avoiding scope creep, right? So that idea about staying on budget and on schedule has to do largely with scope. And so the next two things are kind of related to that. You ensure that the project is completed in a timely manner. Often you'll have a deadline in this course, you certainly do. And cost. You need to understand how much things are going to cost you to do, not just in terms of financial constraints, but what it's going to cost you in terms of time for people and in terms of engaging with different kinds of people. Are you going to have to bring somebody in from the outside, for example? The quality is something that you need to keep an eye on in terms of the outcome and the output of your project. And that is linked to figuring out how to measure that quality. What does quality mean in the case of your project, and how do you track that? Resources, you're going to have to be able to reach out and engage with resources in order to be able to do your project management. If you're working in a company, for example, you may have to reach out and engage with your human resources department in order to bring people into the project that has the skills that you need. Again, that's also related to your ability to manage the integration across the whole project and to understand the cost in terms of personnel, etc. So these things are interrelated. Communications, ensuring communications are planned and carried out appropriately. This could be within your team, but it also could be ensuring that your different levels in your organization are kept apprised of the progress of your project, especially if you're going to need to access additional resources or something like that. Risk management is another thing. You're going to have to understand what is the risk and the range of risk that you can tolerate in your project, both in terms of the quality of the output and in terms of the potential for overrunning time and cost. I mentioned procurement before. This is in a corporate kind of an environment. You may need to purchase something or contract out certain parts of your project. And then the last one will be very important in your projects, and certainly is along all of them, but you need to engage with stakeholders, appropriately identify and engage with them throughout the project. Right from the point where you're doing things like identifying the need for the project, to setting objectives, to ensuring that the quality of the project is adequate, etc. Finally, I'm going to move away from the Project Management Institute sort of basic fundamentals of this in order to point out that there are a variety of different ways of doing project management in different contexts and for different kinds of projects. So the slide that I have up here is a project monitoring and evaluation approach, which is more of a methodology than the PMI stuff. The PMI stuff is more of industry standards and guidelines and things like that. But there are a bunch of more specific methodologies that you can apply that have step-by-step process. Do this, then do that, do the other thing. That in general follow those five stages that PMI identifies. The PMBOK thing, through initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, and controlling, and closing the project. Outcome mapping is one that is particularly applied in development programming. That's international development by aid agencies and such things, and is championed in particular by the International Development Research Council of Canada, which is IDRC is a federal government agency in Canada. Right, so that's development programming oriented towards change and social transformation, and that's why it says outcomes rather than results or outputs or products, that kind of thing. So this is a methodology that provides tools and a design process to gather information on outcomes defined as behavioral changes of the people, the stakeholders, and the beneficiaries involved in this process. And you can see here a schematic from that, and this particular stage is in outcome mapping, where it takes you through a design process, then monitoring and evaluation, which feeds back into the design project in an iterative kind of way. And I've put the website link here in case anybody's interested in this. This could be applied to things other than, adapted to things other than development programming. Some of the tools, for example, are quite useful. For example, the identification of what are called outcome challenges, which is like a challenge question that you might have received for your project. So an example from the C4 class would be, can rideshare service be implemented alongside public transportation options for the York University community? Question mark. That might be an outcome challenge. A progress marker is a more specific objective that you can track to see whether or not that objective has been achieved in a number of different stages. For example, they have 3 stages where, for example, you expect to see some kind of behavioral change. Expect to see is an actual label that you put on that. What you would like to see beyond that bare minimum is something that you say like to see. Oh, even better is something I would like to see this. And then there's love to see. So expect to see, like to see, love to see. So you're looking at 3 levels of achievement, and then you can track them as being partially achieved, fully achieved, not achieved, that kind of thing. And there's a journaling process that tracks things like journaling those outcomes, journaling performance, that kind of an approach. So that's one other thing that you might apply in a totally different kind of environment than a corporate environment, like is implied in some of these other things. I just wanted to put this up, which is associated with that, which tracks results change. So you've got inputs that go into it, resources. You have activities that happen, and this is a development context. So you might construct schools or hire additional teachers. An output, we built so many toilets. An outcome, children are using the toilets instead of doing open air defecation in a development context. And the impact is a much longer term kind of thing. 5-10 years down the road, you might be able to track improvement in reduction of rates of disease or reduction of rates of poverty, that kind of thing. And that's why outcome mapping targets outcomes, because you can measure them on a shorter term and their changes in behavior. Other approaches to project management in the international development sphere, results-based management and the logical framework approach or logical framework analysis. And in the more corporate kind of world, things like agile development, Scrum, Kanban, Lean, Waterfall, Sigma. These are all different ways of doing project management with different methodological approaches. So these ones are actually methodologies that might be suitable for different kinds of situations. So example for smaller or larger teams, for corporate contexts that have higher or lower levels of uncertainty, possibilities of being surprised by things happening in the production process. And that's where I'm going to leave it. I will be doing a session on a kind of project management, or at least how we approach problems and organize ourselves to work with and solve problems in my field of study, which is in environmental studies and environmental management. I'll be talking about the ecosystem approach in that session. Thanks for your attention, and if you have any questions, feel free to drop by during my office hours, or you can email me at bunchmj@yorku.ca.